This is all I got left! Show me what I have to do! You can't stop me!
Both showcase just how strong-willed the topic of today's video is, that topic being Isaac Clarke, the protagonist of all the mainline Dead Space games. However, in regards to who he is, to give a basic overview, Isaac is a former ship systems engineer who worked for the Concordance Extraction Corporation and played a pivotal role in the events surrounding the markers in the 26th century, and serves as the protagonist of the Dead Space franchise as mentioned. In regards to personality traits and appearance, Isaac Clarke is a standard human, wearing a resource integration gear suit known as a rig suit, the iconic one he's recognised for wearing being the engineering suit, which has a health display on the back along with a stasis module, an inbuilt navigation system, holographic displays for communication, and a kinesis module on the left arm. And in addition to this, the suit has built-in survival features, an internal oxygen supply for work in a vacuum, gravity boots and thrusters for moving in a zero-gravity environment, along with armour to protect against damage from various sources, all of which could be necessary for Isaac Clarke's line of work before the events of Dead Space, and would serve him well during them, especially when he gains the kinesis and stasis modules. In additional regards to his appearance, Isaac Clarke's design has changed between the 4 games. Isaac in the first game has a younger, more rounded face. In the second game he looks older and his hair has become darker, this being my favourite design. His face is thinner and looks more actually proportional with a real person. Then there is the Dead Space 3 design which looks much older and much more tired, Isaac even growing some facial hair. And finally we have the Dead Space remake version where they completely changed his hair colour, and he looks like a middle ground between the Dead Space 1 and 2 design. And personally, I really do not like his face in Dead Space Remake. I much prefer the Dead Space 2 design. Another thing to note about Isaac's appearance is that his occupation and duty for being an engineer for nearly 20 years has definitely taken a toll on his posture, as he stands throughout the series and walks with a very noticeable hunch. And now with his appearance talked about, we can talk about his personality and traits. Talking about personality next, Isaac Clarke harbours a strong resentment and distrust towards the religion of Unitology. This absolute resentment forming because of his mother's conversion to Unitology and the following psychological deterioration and brainwashing that came from it, which caused her to liquidate the family estate to pay the church and later to kill Isaac's father and then herself. His hatred of Unitology only growing when he discovered that the church took his parents' bodies immediately after the murder-suicide and refused to return them or reveal where they were, denying Isaac any form of closure he could have. This grief consumed him and led him to blame his girlfriend Nicole for his parents' deaths, primarily because she worked in a psychiatric facility on Earth where she specialised in helping patients leave the Church of Unitology. But before she left to go on the USG Ishimura, which Isaac advised her to do because it would be a missed opportunity to not be on that thing before it was decommissioned, Isaac Clarke's father, Paul Clarke, returned home from his tour, believing his return would be therapeutic for his wife, and Nicole had Octavia, Isaac's mother, released from the psychiatric facility to go back home with her husband. Then Nicole goes off on the Ishimura and calls Isaac 6 months later. Nicole thanked Isaac for helping her get the position, Isaac being happy for her despite her being gone for 6 months. However, sometime later Octavia's mental health declined again, resulting in her murdering her husband before killing herself. Isaac then called Nicole and in his grief blamed her for their deaths, causing her to angrily hang up on him and leave him even more devastated, that being the final time they would ever actually talk. To summarise that bit, she sent his mother home from the psychiatric facility, then she destabilised, killed her husband, then herself, while Nicole was on the Ishimura, leading to Isaac getting angry and then her hanging up on him. A thing to know about this is that Isaac was angry because she claimed that his mother was well enough to return home when she clearly wasn't, telling Nicole that she might as well have just killed her herself. He then quickly realises what he said, tries to apologise, Nicole cuts him off in response, leaving him regretful. That basically summarises the whole drama between him and his girlfriend Nicole before she fucking kills herself in front of him on a videotape. This being so devastating to Isaac that he simply refuses to face the fact that she's dead, finding himself completely unable to watch the end of her final message despite the fact that he knows what's already happened. This shows that Isaac loved her so much that he just couldn't accept it. And this love and refusal to accept that Nicole was dead is something that the marker would use against Isaac. It would use hallucinations of Nicole and her voice to drive him to do things for it throughout the events of the first game. But Isaac has other characterization outside of this in the first game. albeit do keep in mind we're using Dead Space Remake for all this context because the original Dead Space doesn't have much on Isaac as a person. Anyway, Isaac is a pretty empathetic individual too and has consistently been determined to save as many people as he could even at the risk of his own life, and that's in complete disregard to his own mental state at the time. A few good examples of this include him activating a gunship so Ellie could be rescued despite her protests, so that she wouldn't end up like Nicole, and trying to save a fellow engineer, Jennifer Santos, from a cable car under attack by a large necromorph, when doing so was extremely dangerous to his own life. In this instance, when Carver cut the cable from the car and it sent Santos down to her death, Isaac was extremely angry and distraught. Isaac also protected Carver from the necromorphs during Carver's hallucination confrontations in the marker containment labs on Tol Volantis. And during the events of Dead Space Remake, Isaac shows empathy even for those who tried to betray him or harm him, such as attempting to save Kendra Daniels from the hive mind despite the earlier betrayal. And in addition to this, if the player completes the premeditated malpractice side mission prior to killing the hunter, Isaac will say, "You're done, Harris, he can't hurt you anymore," which is in reference to the origins of the hunter which was added in through Dead Space Remake. Albeit due to his experiences on the USG Ishimura in the first game, the betrayal of Kendra Daniels, and all the crap that went down there, Isaac was very reluctant to trust fellow survivors, particularly anyone associated with EarthGov or the Church of Unitology. However, he would still go far out of his way to help others if the situation allowed for it. Isaac's distrust of EarthGov beginning with Kendra's betrayal and her interests in producing more red markers for energy purposes. He was also constantly hunted by the EarthGov forces on Titan Station, who were out to eliminate him along with other subjects who were part of Project Telomere. Project Telomere being an operation to study the marker's effects on humans, using very specialized equipment in hopes of saving humanity by harnessing the marker's power. A piece of the specialist machinery in question being the Noonlight Diagnostics machine. You know, that machine from Dead Space 2 that stabs people in the eye? Yeah, that thing. But anyway, even after escaping from Titan Station, he was still hunted and forced to go underground as to avoid being captured, after being apprehended by Robert Norton and John Carver on the New Horizons lunar colony. Clarke refused to help them partially because they were EarthGov soldiers, but ultimately Isaac would have to work with Carver during the events of Dead Space 3. And in addition to all this, Isaac doesn't take shit from anybody. A good example of him not tolerating people's bullshit is when the apparition of Nicole betrays him in Dead Space 2. Upon him finding out the apparition was literally just the marker fucking with him, Isaac says to it, "Fuck you and fuck your marker." And then, like the absolute Giga Chad he is, opens fire on the apparition and all the demons that it summons, in a psychological battle against a literal conduit of an eldritch being. And Isaac goes one-on-one with the hive mind in Dead Space 1, among a bunch of other Giga Chad activities. In fact, rather than sit here and keep explaining it to you, I think this clip will suffice. And with that example set, now to move on. Oh wait, before I do, yes, that Where the Hood At metal cover will be linked in the description for those interested, along with my Discord, which is where you can get notified when new videos come out, because the YouTube notification system is dookie batter. But anyway, yeah. Now to talk about Isaac's traits along with his skills and abilities, because those are all pretty much tied in. Regarding the skills, abilities and traits of Isaac Clarke is extremely resourceful and able to adapt to a situation surprisingly fast. Isaac had no combat experience prior to his experience on the Ishimura, but yet adapted to the situation incredibly well, hacking apart necromorphs with the plasma cutter exceptionally easily. And considering the fact Isaac is a trained engineer, he is especially good with repairing, dismantling and maintaining electronics or using them to his advantage, especially in dangerous situations. A good example of this coming about during the Sprawl outbreak, in which he dismantled a kinesis therapy machine box in the hospital and removed the kinesis module for his own use, along with a stasis module sometime later. He was also able to improvise a makeshift plasma cutter using only a flashlight and a surgical module when he tried to help a survivor, all of which shows Isaac has very advanced problem-solving skills. And regarding a trait towards his intelligence, Isaac has a noticeable affinity for the marker. As an engineer, his intelligence made him very compatible with the marker signal, making him one of the select individuals whom it would speak to in order to create replicas of itself. and his initial lower resistance until the events of mid-Dead Space 2 to Dead Space 3 made him easy for it to influence and manipulate, albeit Isaac was not driven to murderous or suicidal insanity like those around him, instead being influenced into becoming an architect for the marker. Information on how to create the markers being extracted from his brain during Project Telomere on Titan Station, which was later used to construct the Site-12 marker. This along with him contracting marker dementia, which manifested in the form of hallucinations of Nicole, who was pushing him to complete tasks to further the marker's agenda. Albeit that's until this fake Nicole betrays him, he tells the marker to go fuck itself and then battles it mentally. Isaac defeats his inner demons by refusing to kill himself to complete convergence on Titan Station, destroys the marker he had built, albeit his mind still possessed the secrets to the marker and he evidently still suffered from the urge to write down instructions for marker replication. Several years later, as seen on the notes left in his apartment on the New Horizon colony, however, by that point his dementia has manifested more as an affinity for the markers rather than a madness. This is because in a 2021 interview with Visceral Games writer Chuck Beaver, it's revealed that he and the creative director Ben Wannert considered Isaac to be a herald of the markers due to his compatibility with their signal, albeit this is something I talked about more in my Brethren Moons video, so if you want more information on that, go check that out because that ties more into the overall narrative of Dead Space. But ultimately with that is his marker affinity covered, along with his skills, abilities and traits. Now to talk about his past. Born on June 5th, 2461, Isaac lived with his parents, award-winning ship architect Paul Clarke of the Galactic Union Merchant Marine Corps, and his wife Octavia in the northeastern American seaboard sector. Isaac lived most of his life with his mother as father went on an extended mission before he could even get to know him. Octavia suffered from loneliness due to Paul's absence and was recommended by a psychiatrist to get involved in the community, which led to her joining the Church of Unitology. Isaac, however, took after his father and obtained an education in electrical and mechanical engineering, him being selected to attend a prominent engineering college. Unfortunately, he was unable to afford the tuition fees as his mother had squandered the family funds to purchase a vested level title in the Church of Unitology, this leading to his distrust in Unitology, which we mentioned earlier. But despite his financial difficulties, Isaac managed to graduate with high honours from a lesser known college assisted by scholarships and financial assistance, this being where his CEC career would begin. As several years later, he enlisted in the GUMMC, much like his father, allowing him to prove his abilities in original engineering situations to his superiors. Which brings us to 2505, in which Octavia is admitted to a psychiatric center due to Paul's absence during his extended tours with the Marine Corps, causing her mental health to greatly decline. Assigned to her was Dr. Nicole Brennan, who specialized in helping patients leave the Church of Unitology, in which during Octavia's therapy sessions, Isaac would meet Nicole and the two would begin a romantic relationship. In 2507, a position for senior medical officer opens on the USG Ishimura, roughly a year before the legendary planet cracker's scheduled decommissioning, in which Isaac encouraged Nicole to take the position. While Nicole was content with her life and relationship with Isaac, he insisted that she would regret it if she didn't work aboard the Ishimura before it was decommissioned. And with Isaac's help, Nicole was convinced to apply and accepted the offer. But before Nicole's departure, Paul Clarke returns from his tour, and I think we already know what happens here because I've already explained it. She goes off on the Ishimura, the mother's mental health declines, she kills the dad and then herself, the bodies are taken by the Church of Unitology, Isaac ends up having a breakup with his girlfriend, and then she fucking kills herself. But whatever, moving on. In 2508, Nicole sent Isaac a transmission following the planet crack of Aegis 7 in which she apologized for their argument, which was due to the nature of the emergency on Aegis 7 and the Ishimura, in which Nicole was driven to suicide. Realizing it was her suicide note, he stopped the video before the end, pretended that she was still alive, needed to be saved, refused to accept that he had lost the only person he had left in his life, and volunteered to be part of the emergent response unit that was attached to the USG Kellyan, in the hopes of reuniting with Nicole. The ship had been reportedly orbiting Aegis 7 on its illegal mission to crack the planet. Their mission was to investigate the distress signal that had been sent by the Ishimura and discover the reason behind the total communications blackout. Their attempts to land on the Ishimura being where Dead Space 1 begins. And with that is the entire past of Isaac Clarke before the events of Dead Space 1. Albeit I'm not going to sit here and explain the events of all three major Dead Space games because there's no real point doing that. Instead, I want to make a point regarding the writing of Dead Space 1 and the remake, or more accurately explain the differences between them and make some points about them. In regards to that, the first thing I want to say is, Dead Space Remake conveys details from the story much earlier, such as Unitology, the Marcus effects, and other details that were expanded on in Dead Space 2, as to make the plot move along faster and make room for more depth. As in the original Dead Space 1, it's not until Chapter 10 that events actually begin to expand, showing the larger narrative. By speeding things up and making the story denser, they're able to add in more depth to characters like Isaac Clarke and those around him. The remake also makes changes that expand on the world building and fix a few plot holes, albeit it has its own issues. And some characterizations were changed or expanded on, Isaac having dialogue being a primary example as to give him actual character, unlike in Dead Space 1 with him not speaking at all, which allows Isaac as a character to have a more active role in the story rather than simply do things he's told to because plot demands it. And Dr. Mercer is also an example of these changes, the way he conducts himself going from cruel religious zealot to evil occult scientist. And by adding the origins of the Regenerator into the game as well, it expands on his blatantly psychopathic personality. But there's a major downside to this, and that would be Mercer's death. In Dead Space 1, he's killed by an infector, showcasing his absolute devotion to the marker and unitology. While in Remake, he is implied to be killed by the tentacle as it drags him away along with the marker, and he seems to regret his decision. As you can see here, Dr. Mercer and Isaac both being expanded on as characters has its positives and drawbacks. In the case of Isaac, it fleshed him out and made him a better character. In the case of Mercer, he was expanded on in an interesting way, albeit it could have been handled differently to make him a bit more accurate to the original interpretation. And regarding continuity changes, Nicole being dead works differently in Dead Space 1 and Remake. In Dead Space 1, she's simply gone and just a hallucination. But in Remake, Isaac is hallucinating someone else as her, and they, Dr. Elizabeth Cross, are hallucinating him as someone else, which patches a plot hole in regards to how she was able to do anything in the original, if she was never real to begin with, by having it be a physical person, not just a vision with stuff somehow happening. Albeit Dr. Elizabeth Cross plays a very small role in the plot leading up to this point, so her being there feels forced and contrived. And the remake gives us more information on Isaac Clarke's family, you know, the whole thing we talked about with his mother, unitology, her killing the dad, suicide and all that. This adds further humanity and tragedy to Isaac Clarke's story while tying in unitology even more, explaining Isaac's hatred of them. His relationship with Nicole falling apart as a result of his parents' murder-suicide also feeding into this narrative change, and showcasing actual connections between the characters. And Remake also has the addition of an alternate ending, which can only be attained in New Game Plus by finding marker fragments, which implies Isaac is going to build a marker for Nicole who he believes is still alive, which suggests this is an alternate ending where Isaac has gone fully insane from the marker's influence, creating an alternate way for Dead Space 2 to begin. Albeit there's a problem with that. Isaac knows Nicole is not real in Dead Space 2 and the marker was made in Dead Space 2 without his consent, the information being extracted from him, so this connection is really weak. And if the alternate ending is canon, it implies a different version of Isaac for a potential Dead Space 2 remake, but sadly that's never going to happen because Emotive were disappointed by the lack of sales, so no approval for a remake was given. So we best consider this alternate ending non-canon, as if it's supposed to lead into Dead Space 2, it conflicts way too much with the already established lore. But ultimately, with these points, I think Dead Space Remake's writing has more depth than the original, which I greatly appreciate for making videos like these, albeit the means this was achieved through are not the greatest and probably should have been reworked further in some places. Like, if you're going to bother remaking the whole game, you may as well make the story work coherently instead of forcing things. And with that, that's all I have to say on the writing differences between the remake and the original. And with that, now to get into the final section of the video, that being the trivia section. But before we do, I just want to say, firstly, YouTube does not like my channel for some reason, so if you could copy the link to this video and share it however you can, that would be really great. Secondly, if you have any criticism or comments or anything you want to say, drop it in the comments below. But yeah, with that, now to get straight into the trivia. Isaac Clarke is voiced and modeled after Gunnar Wright in Dead Space 2, Dead Space 3 and more closely in Dead Space 2023. Prior to this, in the original Dead Space, Isaac's face was modeled after Max Shapi. Although his face is shown at the end of the original game, it can also be seen during the game's intro sequence by rotating the camera view around. Ben Wernatz, the former creative director of Dead Space, has revealed in an interview that he considered Isaac and Carver as options to be the protagonist of the cancelled Dead Space 4 game, suggesting that both of them survived the Terra Nova crashing into one of the Brethren moons. According to the scales in the first store you come across in Dead Space 2, Isaac weighs 195 pounds with his patient suit on. His weight rises from 195 to 255 pounds after wearing the CEC engineering suit, meaning the suit itself weighs 60 pounds. In Dead Space 2008, Isaac holds his plasma cutter with one hand, standing while aiming. However, in Dead Space 2, 3 and Remake he uses a two-handed grip. In Dead Space 3, Isaac wears a flight jacket with a rig attached, brown gloves and a shirt with an unknown logo with the words New Horizon and Hope. This is actually a stripped down version of the hacker suit from Dead Space 2. In Dead Space 2, Isaac canonically takes damage in only 7 scenes. The slasher that pins him down in Chapter 1, being tossed out of the train car in Chapter 2, being slammed multiple times by the Tormentor in Chapter 5, being assaulted by the drag tentacle in Chapter 11, being thrown off the drill at the beginning of Chapter 13, being stabbed in the eye with the needle from the Noonlight Diagnostics machine in Chapter 13, and being impaled twice from a javelin gun by Tiedemann in Chapter 15. And interestingly, Isaac's gameplay health status only goes down in the first and last instances. At the beginning of the Awakened DLC, Isaac's left eye is no longer swollen from the explosion that he took earlier, and Isaac's suit still has its helmet intact, despite him ripping it clean off his face prior to the battle with the moon. It is unknown how his suit was suddenly repaired without a suit kiosk, and also how his wounds healed so quickly, although this could simply be an oversight from the developers or an intentional decision given the DLC's hallucination themes. Regarding inspirations, the name Isaac Clarke plays homage to world-renowned science fiction authors Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke. The names of his parents, Octavia Clarke and Paul Clarke, are likely tributes to the esteemed sci-fi writers named Octavia Butler and Paul Anderson respectively. And Isaac has been likened to characters like Ellen Ripley from the Alien movies due to him surviving the outbreak despite a non-military background, as well as the fact that he becomes a source of information on the creatures similar to Ripley. And funny enough, Isaac himself has a bunch of appearances in a bunch of other games unrelated to Dead Space. Albeit, I think it'd be more fun if you went and looked for them yourself rather than me tell you them all. Some of them are actually genuinely surprising. One I will tell you about is how he's playable in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. His default appearance being that of the Arctic survival suit from the third game, and his rival in the game is Zeus from the God of War franchise. But yeah, with that, that's the trivia. Which brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed, give it a like, subscribe, share it, helps me out, leave comments. Goodbye.